The late 19th century in Alabama was a time of quiet disarray. The end of the Civil War had left the southern states in ruin, a fragmented society still adjusting to the harsh realities of a new era. It was a time when the truth was often buried under layers of societal denial, wrapped in the rhetoric of Reconstruction, and overshadowed by the weight of old wounds. It was in this atmosphere that the first whispers began to spread, as an unsettling discovery shook the quiet communities of Alabama to their core. It started with the discovery of a girl, one among many. She was a young child, perhaps 6 or 7, with strikingly pale skin and hair so red it seemed almost unnatural, like the bright hue of a flame in the night. She was found alone in a small, desolate cabin, abandoned in the outskirts of a rural town. The girl's origins were unknown, and even more troubling, there were no records to explain her parentage. A search for her parents turned up nothing, not a single person came forward to claim her, nor did anyone recognize her. There were no stories, no clues, nothing to shed light on who she was or how she had come to be there. She was like a shadow in a town that prided itself on its order, its clear divisions between right and wrong, known and unknown. What made her discovery even more bizarre, however, was that she was not the only one. Over the course of several years, other girls with similar traits, pale skin, vivid red hair, were found, each in different, isolated parts of the state. These girls were always alone, abandoned, with no clear explanation of how they had arrived at their locations. As the years passed, the pattern began to emerge. All of these girls had the same strange features, and none of them had fathers who could be identified. They were, in essence, orphaned not only by circumstance but by their very existence. Their very being seemed to defy explanation. They did not fit the narratives of their time, nor did they belong to any known family or lineage. The local authorities were perplexed. At first, they believed these girls to be the result of some kind of accident, the product of abandoned relationships, unwed mothers, and unwanted children. But as more were discovered, and as the details of their origins grew murkier, the questions surrounding them deepened. Who were these girls, and where did they come from? Why was it that their fathers were never named, never found? There was a sense of unease that grew with each new discovery. A certain coldness spread through the town, the kind that settles in the air when something is wrong, something that cannot be explained. Rumors began to circulate, growing like wildfire in a town that was increasingly on edge. Was there something more sinister at play? Was this some kind of curse, some dark force that had begun to haunt the land? Or was there a more mundane explanation, something that could be rationalized with science or reason? The truth, it seemed, was far more elusive than anyone could have imagined. The local community, already reeling from the social and economic upheaval of the post-Civil War era, began to fracture. Long-standing societal norms and beliefs about family, race, and identity began to collide with these strange events. The discovery of these girls seemed to challenge everything the community thought it knew about its own history. These girls did not belong, and yet they were there. Their very presence seemed to be a direct confrontation with the status quo. The town, unable to reconcile the reality in front of them with the stories they had long told themselves, began to retreat into denial. At first, some suggested that the girls might be the product of relationships between enslaved women and unknown men, perhaps foreign sailors or mysterious visitors from other parts of the world. These explanations offered a certain level of comfort to the townspeople, a way of placing the girls into the context of the world they knew. But even this theory proved difficult to accept. Why was it only girls with these specific traits, pale skin, red hair, who were being found? Why were their fathers never identified? The questions kept coming, each one leading to more uncertainty and confusion. There were those who believed that the girls were part of a dark prophecy, a curse that had been placed upon the land long ago. This theory found its roots in the local folklore, tales of old, passed down through generations. Some spoke of a powerful family, one with connections to the plantation elite, whose ancestors had committed terrible sins. These sins, according to the legend, had been passed down through the bloodline, and the birth of these strange girls was seen as the manifestation of this curse. It was whispered that the girls were born with these peculiar features to mark them as a sign of the family's guilt. Others speculated that the girls were the product of something even more nefarious, a secret bloodline, hidden for generations, perhaps even connected to the supernatural. The more the rumors spread, the more the town began to divide. Some were desperate for an explanation, no matter how fantastical, while others rejected any theory that strayed too far from the conventional. Religious leaders began to weigh in, offering their own interpretations of the events. Some saw the girls as a punishment, a divine judgment upon the town for its past sins. Others saw them as innocent victims, trapped in a cycle of violence and neglect that they could not escape. But for all the talk, no one had any concrete answers. No one knew the truth. The mystery only deepened as time went on. The girls continued to be found, always with the same features, always with no fathers in sight. Some of them were adopted by local families, while others were left to wander, abandoned and alone. The authorities, unable to find any rational explanation, seemed content to let the mystery linger. It was as though they had come to accept that some things could not be understood, that some stories were best left untold. And so, the strange phenomenon continued, a haunting presence that lingered in the background of Alabama's history, never fully explained, never fully understood. The girls, with their red hair and pale skin, became a symbol of the town's unresolved past, a reminder of the shadows that still haunted its streets. The questions they raised were never answered, and in the end, it seemed that no one truly wanted them answered. The mystery, like the girls themselves, was left to fade into the fog of history. The town of Fairhope, nestled in the deep heart of Alabama, had always been a place where time seemed to move in a slow, deliberate fashion. Situated near the Gulf Coast, its sleepy streets and faded architecture evoked a sense of history that had weathered the storms of both nature and society. The town's origins were steeped in the shadow of the antebellum South, its foundations built on the backs of enslaved laborers who had worked the fertile land of cotton and tobacco plantations. The air still carried the echoes of that bygone era, whispers of a past filled with secrets, struggles, and injustices that had never been fully addressed. The impact of the Civil War and the brutal institution of slavery was still felt, even as the region struggled to define itself in the wake of such a profound loss. At the heart of this town was the land, a sprawling plantation that had once belonged to one of the wealthiest families in the region. The Larks, the name was as entrenched in the history of Fairhope as the ancient oak trees that lined the town square, were the proverbial patriarchs of the area. For generations, their wealth had been tied to the land, the crops, and the enslaved people who had been forced to work on it. The Larks were landowners, powerful and unyielding in their control of the region. But even the most powerful families were not immune to the changing tides of history. After the Civil War, the family's fortune began to dwindle. The plantation economy crumbled as the South slowly tried to rebuild itself, a process fraught with pain and uncertainty. The end of slavery had irrevocably altered the social fabric, and the Larks, like so many others, struggled to adapt to this new world. Despite the loss of their wealth, the Larks maintained their prominence in the town. They were respected, but not without a certain level of unease from those who remembered the old ways. The legacy of slavery still hung over the town like a dark cloud, and the Larks, though no longer the ruling class, still held an undeniable sway in local affairs. However, it was not just the old wounds of history that haunted the town, there was something else, something darker and more personal, that lingered in the background of the Lark family's history. The Lark estate, though once grand, had fallen into a state of disrepair, as had much of the town. The once beautiful plantation home, with its columns and wide porches, now stood as a decaying monument to a past that could not be fully forgotten. Few dared to venture near the old mansion, and fewer still knew the full history of the family that had once lived there. But behind the decaying walls, there was a story that few knew, a story of secrets, hidden bloodlines, and a curse that had been passed down through the generations. The first known record of the girls who were discovered with the unsettling traits, the pale skin and the vivid red hair, could be traced back to the late 1800s, when the first of these mysterious children was found on the outskirts of Fairhope. But their story did not begin in isolation. For years before these discoveries, the Larks had been the subject of hushed whispers and quiet speculation. The family had never been fully accepted by the local community, their status forever overshadowed by their history with slavery and their apparent involvement in a series of strange and inexplicable events. The earliest signs of something unusual came in the form of rumors. According to some locals, there had been whispers of strange births among the enslaved women who had worked on the Lark plantation. Some claimed that children were born with skin so pale it seemed to glow in the moonlight, while others spoke of children with hair so red it appeared to be on fire. These children, the rumors said, were different from the others, born of an unknown father and marked by an eerie, unnatural appearance. No one knew for sure whether these children were real or merely the product of superstition and fear, but the stories persisted. Some said these children were the result of supernatural forces at work, others suggested they were the result of some forbidden union between a member of the Lark family and an enslaved woman. The truth, however, remained elusive, locked away in the shadows of history. When the first of the strange girls was discovered outside Fairhope, the townspeople were quick to connect the event to these old rumors. The girl, a child of no more than 7 or 8, was found abandoned in a field near the Lark estate. She had the same pale skin and fiery red hair that had been described in the old stories, and just as before, no one could identify her family or her origins. It was as if she had simply appeared out of nowhere, a phantom child with no place in the world. The authorities were baffled. The girl's mother was never found, and no one came forward to claim her. She was taken in by a local family, but the mystery of her parentage remained unsolved. What made this discovery even more unsettling was the growing realization that she was not an isolated case. Over the course of the next few years, other girls with similar features began to appear, always alone, always abandoned, always with no trace of their fathers. As the discoveries continued, the connections to the Lark family's troubled past became more apparent. Some local residents began to question whether the strange occurrences were related to the family's legacy, and whether the girls were somehow tied to the old plantation. Speculation ran rampant, and soon, a theory began to take hold. What if these girls were the descendants of the Larks, born of some long-forgotten, forbidden union between a Lark family member and an enslaved woman? It was a story that fit with the dark reputation of the Larks, a family whose past was intertwined with the horrors of slavery and whose secrets seemed to have been buried along with the crumbling remnants of their plantation. The more the girls were found, the more the rumors spread. Some believed they were the result of a family curse, an ancient retribution for the sins of their forefathers. Others thought the girls were the product of an illicit bloodline, a hidden family secret that had been passed down through generations. Whatever the truth was, the girls seemed to be a manifestation of the darker elements of the town's history, a living reminder of the sins of the past. As the town grappled with the mystery, the Lark family itself remained silent. They did not acknowledge the rumors, nor did they speak about the strange events that seemed to follow them. It was as if they were hiding something that no one wanted to confront. The town, for its part, was reluctant to press the issue too hard. Fear, it seemed, had taken root in the heart of Fairhope, and the townspeople, much like the Larks, preferred to let the darkness remain unexamined. The mystery of the girls, like the family's history, was left to fester in the quiet corners of the town, a secret too powerful and too dangerous to be fully understood. The haunting presence of these girls, with their strange features and untraceable origins, cast a long shadow over Fairhope. No one could explain them, and yet their existence was undeniable. They were a living enigma, tied to a family whose past was filled with more questions than answers. The story of the Larks, and of the girls who bore their mark, was a tale of history's forgotten sins, a dark legacy that refused to fade away. The truth, if it ever existed, seemed lost to time, buried beneath layers of fear, denial, and silence. And so, the mystery persisted, a lingering specter in a town that was unwilling to confront its past. In the years following the first discovery of the mysterious girls, the whispers in the town of Fairhope began to take on a more tangible form. These whispers, at first mere rumors, began to gain momentum as more girls, always the same, pale-skinned with fiery red hair, were found scattered throughout the outskirts of the town. As time passed, the pattern of these strange discoveries became more pronounced, and the townspeople could no longer ignore the eerie resemblance between each of these children. They were, in a way, tied together by something that no one seemed to be able to explain, a bond that went beyond mere coincidence. These girls were not just anomalies, they were a mystery, one that burrowed deep into the heart of the town's darkest corners. The first few discoveries had been alarming, unsettling even, but the townspeople's initial reaction was to dismiss the events as isolated incidents. They reasoned that perhaps these were simply unfortunate children, abandoned for reasons that no one would ever understand. Maybe these girls were the offspring of transient men who had come through the town, their fathers being unknown strangers who left without a trace. There had always been rumors of travelers who passed through Fairhope, men who came to work on the plantations and never left, disappearing without a word. Perhaps, it was thought, these girls were the children of these men, born of fleeting, unremembered unions. But as the discoveries continued, the town's attempts to rationalize the phenomenon grew weaker. The fact that each of these children shared the same striking, otherworldly features raised questions that no one could answer. At first, the authorities treated these incidents as simple cases of abandonment. The children were taken in by the local orphanage, or placed with families willing to adopt them. The town tried to move on, as communities often do when faced with the unknown. However, there was an undeniable sense of discomfort in the air, a lingering unease that could not be easily dispelled. What began as a trickle of unusual occurrences soon became a flood. By the time the seventh or eighth girl had been found, it was impossible to dismiss the strange consistency of these discoveries. These girls, with their pale, translucent skin and flaming red hair, began to take on an almost spectral quality. It was as though they existed not just in the physical world but in some liminal space between the known and the unknown. Some of the town's residents began to piece together the shared traits of these girls, and the more they did, the more unsettling the conclusions became. They were all girls. They were all abandoned. And most disturbing of all, their fathers could never be found. No one knew where these men had gone, or who they were. In some cases, the mothers of these girls were rumored to be from the community, or at least familiar with it, but the fathers were always absent, as if erased from existence entirely. The lack of any identifiable father figure was perhaps the most perplexing and unnerving detail of all. It was as though these children were not the result of ordinary human relationships, but something far more mysterious, even supernatural. With each new girl found, the town became more obsessed with the search for answers. Many began to think that the unusual nature of the girls was not a random quirk of biology, but something more deliberate, more purposeful. Some of the older residents, who had long kept their suspicions to themselves, began to speak more openly. They recalled old stories from the time before the Civil War, tales that had been passed down through generations. These were stories that spoke of strange happenings on the Lark plantation, of children who were born with odd traits, children who were whispered to have been the product of unnatural unions. Some even spoke of a curse, a lingering punishment for the sins of the Lark family, whose ancestors had committed countless atrocities during the time of slavery. According to these tales, the curse had been placed upon the family for the suffering they had caused, and these girls, with their red hair and pale skin, were the physical manifestation of that punishment. The more the town delved into the past, the more they found connections to the Larks, who, despite their fall from wealth and power, remained central figures in the town's history. It was said that the Larks had made their fortune through ruthless means, exploiting both the land and the people who worked it. But once slavery had been abolished, and the southern economy began to crumble, the Lark family had found themselves adrift, struggling to maintain their status and wealth. But there were some who believed that the family had never fully shed their ties to the old ways. That, despite the outward changes, something darker still lingered beneath the surface. The townspeople began to wonder if these girls, with their striking features, were somehow connected to the Larks, perhaps the result of an ancient family secret, an inheritance passed down from generation to generation. The idea that these girls could be the descendants of the Lark family was one that gained traction among the more superstitious members of the community. According to these theories, the Larks had long been hiding something, a bloodline tainted by forbidden unions, one that had been carefully concealed from the public eye. The girls, it was said, were the unintended consequence of this hidden lineage, an undeniable reminder of a past that the Larks could never escape. As the mystery of the girls deepened, so too did the curiosity of the townspeople. Many began to search for any clues that might tie these strange children to the Lark family. Some turned to old records, hoping to uncover birth certificates or family documents that might explain the girls' origins. Others spoke to older residents who might remember the past in ways that the younger generation could not. But despite all of their efforts, they found nothing concrete. There were no documents to be found, no verifiable connections to the Larks. It was as if the past had been intentionally erased, wiped away, buried beneath the weight of time and silence. The fact that these girls continued to appear, year after year, with no identifiable father and no clear explanation, only served to reinforce the growing sense of fear that began to sweep through the town. The more the townspeople tried to rationalize the phenomenon, the more it seemed to defy explanation. Every theory they proposed, every piece of evidence they uncovered, only led to more questions. It was as though they were trapped in an endless cycle of searching for answers, only to be confronted with even more bewildering mysteries. And so, as the years passed, the town's obsession with the girls grew. There were whispers of curses, of bloodlines, and of ancient secrets. People began to wonder if these girls were the product of something beyond human understanding, something that could not be explained by science or reason. Were they the remnants of a family's dark past, cursed to appear every few years, or were they the result of some unexplained phenomenon? Whatever the truth was, it remained elusive, and with each new discovery, the town fell further into the grip of mystery. The psychological toll on the community was not to be underestimated. Fear, uncertainty, and suspicion permeated the air, turning neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend. The mystery of these girls became a point of fixation, a constant, nagging question that seemed to offer no resolution. Even as the town continued with its daily routines, the strange occurrences cast a shadow over everything. The residents of Fairhope, for all their efforts to move forward, could not escape the feeling that the past was not done with them. The ghosts of history, in the form of these strange girls, were still haunting their lives, and the answers they so desperately sought remained just out of reach. The more the town searched for the truth, the more they seemed to be drawn into a web of secrets and suspicions that they could not untangle. The girls, with their striking features and mysterious origins, were the town's greatest enigma, a puzzle that no one seemed able to solve. As each new discovery was made, the sense of unease grew, until it seemed as though the town was on the verge of unraveling entirely. The story of the red-haired, pale-skinned girls had spread far beyond the town of Fairhope by the time the fourth or fifth child had been discovered. With each new discovery, the mystery seemed to grow more bizarre, more impenetrable. The people who had once dismissed the strange occurrences as mere happenstance were now forced to confront something far more unsettling, something that no one seemed able to explain. The atmosphere in the town was thick with suspicion, fear, and curiosity. The search for answers had become an obsession, with every resident holding their own theory, their own belief about what had caused these mysterious girls to appear. It wasn't long before the whispers in the streets began to grow louder, and rumors began to swirl about the girls' origins. Some believed that these girls were the result of a curse, placed upon the land by an ancient, unseen force. Others speculated that they were the product of some long-buried secret tied to the Lark family's dark history. Still, there were others who believed that the girls were the result of something more tangible, a bloodline so obscure and hidden that no one had ever known of its existence until now. It was during this time that a few of the girls who had been found were finally old enough to speak, and when they did, their stories only deepened the mystery. These girls, often no older than 12 or 13, were the first to offer any kind of insight into the strange events surrounding their birth. Some spoke of dreams, of visions that seemed to guide them in their search for answers. Others spoke of a sense of being different from everyone else, of feeling like they didn't quite belong. They would describe feeling like outsiders in their own community, haunted by questions about their origins that no one seemed willing to answer. One girl, now 14, spoke of recurring dreams that seemed to involve the Lark family estate, dreams where she wandered the abandoned plantation grounds, as if searching for something, though she could never quite remember what it was. Their recollections were strange, fragmented, and often nonsensical, but they were consistent in one aspect: each girl seemed to feel an overwhelming sense of connection to the old Lark estate, as though they were inexplicably tied to that place. This connection was never fully explained, but it was enough to ignite a growing sense of dread among the townspeople. The idea that these girls might be connected to the Lark family, and specifically to the Lark estate, was no longer just a passing theory. It was a possibility that seemed to gain more weight with each new discovery, with each new piece of testimony from the girls themselves. One girl, in particular, seemed to offer the most compelling evidence of this connection. She had been found near the ruins of the Lark mansion, alone in the woods, cold and frightened. She had wandered into the town with a strange look in her eyes, as if she had come from some distant, unknowable place. When asked where she had been, she could not answer. She spoke only of the mansion, and how she had always known it was there. Her voice was eerily calm, as if she had no idea of the gravity of what she was saying. She was taken to the local orphanage, where she quickly became a subject of fascination and fear. Her peculiar behavior was noted by the townspeople, but it was her insistence that she had been looking for something near the Lark estate that caught the most attention. This girl's story was not an isolated incident. Other girls, upon being found, would sometimes express a similar sentiment, that they were searching for something. They seemed drawn to the Lark estate, whether they knew it or not, as though some unspoken force was guiding them. They couldn't explain what this force was, or why it felt so familiar, but the sensation was overwhelming. The more the townspeople heard these stories, the more they began to connect the dots. Could it be that these girls were somehow connected to the Lark family? Was it possible that they were the descendants of the Larks, their existence a hidden part of the family's dark and shameful past? As the search for answers intensified, so too did the fear and paranoia that gripped the town. The more the townspeople talked, the more they speculated, and the more they tried to piece together the puzzle, the further they seemed to be from any true understanding. Theories ran wild. Some believed that the girls were part of a bloodline cursed by the sins of the Lark's ancestors, a curse that had somehow manifested in these strange children. Others believed that the girls were the product of some form of ancient sorcery or magic, a force that had been set into motion long before the town was even founded. The idea of a curse, particularly one tied to the Lark family, began to gain serious traction. After all, the Larks had not only been powerful landowners, but their family history was steeped in rumors of cruelty, excess, and hidden sins. It was said that the Larks had built their fortune on the backs of enslaved people, that they had wielded their power without mercy or remorse. The family had left a legacy of suffering, and some believed that the sins of the Larks had been passed down through the generations, leaving the family and its descendants to live under the shadow of that legacy. The idea that the Larks had left behind a bloodline curse to bring forth these strange, red-haired girls made a disturbing kind of sense, at least to those who were inclined to believe in such things. As the theories about the girls' origins continued to grow, so did the suspicion and fear surrounding the Lark estate. The mansion had been abandoned for years, but its ruins still stood as a haunting reminder of the family's once great wealth and power. It was said to be cursed, and many in the town avoided it altogether, preferring to keep their distance from the decaying structure that loomed over them like a specter. The more the girls were connected to the estate, the more the townspeople began to believe that the mansion itself held some dark secret. Could it be that the answers they sought were hidden within those crumbling walls, waiting to be discovered? But as the girls continued to appear and more theories were proposed, there were those who refused to believe in any connection between the Larks and the mysterious children. These skeptics insisted that the idea of a curse was nothing more than superstition, an attempt to explain the unexplainable through fear and ignorance. They argued that the girls were nothing more than the unfortunate result of natural causes, that their strange features could be attributed to some unknown genetic mutation or inherited trait. Science, they argued, was the answer, not ancient curses or supernatural forces. Yet, despite their objections, the mystery persisted. The more the girls were discovered, the more the town seemed to spiral into a state of collective unease. The theories and suspicions continued to mount, and the town was left grappling with a question that no one seemed able to answer: who were these girls, and what dark secret was tied to their existence? The truth, it seemed, was as elusive as ever, buried beneath layers of superstition, fear, and forgotten history. The more people searched for answers, the more it seemed that the only thing they could agree on was this: these girls were not ordinary children. They were different, marked by something that no one could quite explain. Their strange features, their unexplained origins, their inexplicable connection to the Lark estate, all of it pointed to something far darker than anyone was willing to confront. And as the mystery deepened, the fear surrounding it grew, spreading through the town like wildfire. The search for the truth was far from over, and with each new girl discovered, the town of Fairhope seemed to be pulled deeper into the unknown. As the mystery surrounding the red-haired, pale-skinned girls continued to unfold, the town of Fairhope found itself caught in a growing web of tension and uncertainty. The theories that had once seemed like mere whispers in the dark now began to take on a more menacing weight. The discovery of the girls, with their striking and unnatural appearance, had unsettled the townspeople, but it was the inexplicable absence of their fathers that cast the darkest shadow over the whole affair. In a community where family and heritage were of such importance, the absence of a father figure seemed to strike at the very heart of the town's values. It was as though these girls were not simply unknown, they were, in a sense, untethered, ungrounded in the world of the living, with no roots to claim. At first, many of the local authorities attempted to suppress the growing rumor surrounding the girls. Religious leaders, local officials, and respected figures in the community spoke out against the increasingly widespread speculation, urging the townspeople to remain calm and dismiss the stories as nothing more than baseless superstitions. There was a concerted effort to maintain order and silence the darker voices that had begun to call these events something far more sinister than just coincidence. Many of the town's prominent figures assured the people that the girl's mysterious nature was simply the result of some genetic oddity, nothing more than a freak of nature, an unfortunate but ultimately explainable quirk of biology. But despite these assurances, there were those who refused to be silenced. A group of locals, consisting of older residents who had lived through the era of slavery and witnessed the transformation of the region after the Civil War, began to speak more openly about their suspicions. They recalled the tales of the past, the ones that had been whispered in the dark, and they began to connect the dots. For them, the story of the girls was not a simple medical anomaly or the result of some genetic mutation. No, this was something darker, something that had been embedded in the soil of Fairhope long before any of them were born. The history of the town, and the Lark family's role in it, had long been shrouded in mystery and guilt. The Larks had been among the wealthiest and most influential families in the region, having built their fortune off the labor of enslaved people. But as the years passed, their legacy had become tainted, not just by the violence of their past but by the rumors of something even more sinister buried beneath the surface. These older residents, many of whom had witnessed firsthand the horrors of slavery and the aftermath of the Civil War, began to speak more openly about the possibility of a curse. It was a concept deeply rooted in the collective consciousness of the town, an idea passed down through generations. According to the old stories, the Larks had once committed unspeakable acts on their estate, acts that had stained their bloodline and marked them for some kind of retribution. Some even claimed that these acts had occurred long before the war, during a time when the family had been at the height of their power, a time when they were rumored to have practiced occult rituals and engaged in forbidden acts to ensure their continued dominance. The theory of a curse was one that seemed to resonate with many of the townspeople. After all, these girls, with their striking appearance and untraceable origins, could not be explained by any of the conventional theories. They were too strange, too otherworldly. If they were simply the product of illicit unions between men from outside the town, why were they always girls? And why was it that none of them ever had fathers who could be identified? The absence of their fathers became a focal point of suspicion. These girls, with their pale skin and fiery red hair, seemed to exist outside the rules of the world. They were untouchable, unclaimed, and unfathomable, like phantoms who had come to haunt the town's past. As more and more people began to entertain the idea of a curse, the sense of dread in Fairhope began to intensify. There was a palpable fear that something beyond human comprehension had been unleashed, that the sins of the past had come to collect their due, and the girls were the emissaries of that dark reckoning. But the religious leaders in the town, who had long held sway over the community, were quick to dismiss these fears. They insisted that the strange occurrences were not the result of any supernatural force, but rather the work of Satan, a test of faith that would require the town to band together in prayer and devotion to purge themselves of their sins. For them, the mystery of the girls was not a curse but a moral challenge. The girls, in their view, were a manifestation of evil that had to be confronted with faith and divine intervention. This stance led to further division within the town. While some residents joined in the call for religious unity, others found themselves growing increasingly uneasy with the simplistic explanations offered by the church. The more the religious leaders insisted that the girls were a punishment for the sins of the past, the more some residents began to wonder whether there was something more to the story, something far more complicated than the moralistic narratives being pushed by the town's spiritual leaders. The town's attempts to explain away the girls' mysterious origins by framing them as divine punishment only seemed to deepen the sense that something was being hidden, that the truth was being suppressed in order to avoid confronting the town's darkest secrets. As the town grappled with these conflicting views, the authorities' response to the growing mystery shifted. Initially, the local sheriff and other law enforcement officials had taken a passive stance, allowing the townspeople to come to their own conclusions. But as the situation began to escalate, the sheriff took a more active role in attempting to shut down the rumors. He organized public meetings and gatherings in an attempt to placate the townspeople, reassuring them that everything was under control and that there was no cause for alarm. He emphasized that the girls were simply the result of some unknown genetic disorder, a series of unfortunate accidents that would ultimately be explained by science. Yet, despite his reassurances, the rumors continued to swirl, and the people of Fairhope found themselves at a crossroads. Was the mystery of the girls truly just an unfortunate genetic quirk, or was there something deeper, something more sinister at play? The tension between those who sought a rational explanation and those who believed in the supernatural grew, dividing the community in ways that would leave scars for years to come. Meanwhile, as the girls continued to appear, always alone, always with the same mysterious traits, the suspicion surrounding their origins only deepened. Some even began to speculate that the girls might be part of an ancient bloodline, one that had been hidden away for centuries, perhaps even tied to the Larks. This theory, which had begun as a mere whisper, started to gain more and more traction as more girls were discovered. There were those who believed that the girls were the descendants of a secret family, one that had been carefully hidden away for fear of the shame and scandal their existence might cause. But if this were true, who were their fathers? And why had they been abandoned? The search for answers, it seemed, was becoming a fruitless endeavor. Each new discovery only led to more questions, more suspicions, and more fears. The authorities were no closer to understanding what was happening than they had been when the first girl had been found. The explanations that had been offered by the religious leaders and the sheriff's office seemed hollow and unconvincing, and the people of Fairhope were left to wrestle with a mystery that refused to be solved. As the years went on, the fear and tension in the town only grew. The girls, who had once been the subject of curiosity, now became symbols of the town's unresolved past, their presence a constant reminder of the things that had been buried and forgotten. The town was forever changed by their mysterious existence, and as each new girl was discovered, the sense of unease grew ever stronger. The fathers of these girls, like the truth itself, remained absent, leaving only the haunting presence of their daughters to stir the fears and suspicions that lingered in the heart of Fairhope. The tension in Fairhope continued to build as the years passed, the mystery surrounding the red-haired, pale-skinned girls deepening with each new discovery. The town was no longer simply grappling with the unexplained presence of these girls. The sheer frequency with which they appeared, each one with strikingly similar features, and each one abandoned without a father, began to take on an almost ominous quality. What had begun as a series of isolated events had evolved into a long-running mystery that gnawed at the town's collective psyche. The fear that had initially been whispered now echoed loudly in the streets and homes of Fairhope. But as the mystery persisted, so too did the confusion. No one seemed to have any answers, and the theories continued to multiply, growing wilder and more entrenched as time went on. Among the townspeople, there were those who clung desperately to the idea that these girls were the product of some sort of curse, the Lark family's legacy of cruelty, revenge for the sins of the past. For some, the appearance of the girls seemed to confirm the rumors of an ancient bloodline, a secret that had been buried beneath the soil of Fairhope for generations. The connection between the girls and the Lark estate could no longer be ignored. In the years following the first sightings, more and more girls were discovered near the remnants of the Lark plantation, or in nearby woods where the family had once owned sprawling fields. It was as though the land itself was claiming these children, drawing them to it like moths to a flame. For those who believed in the curse, this could only mean one thing: the land was still haunted by the ghosts of the past, and the girls were its unwilling emissaries. But for others, the connection to the Lark family was nothing more than superstition, an easy explanation for something that seemed inexplicable. These skeptics, many of whom were younger generations in the town, raised in an era when scientific reasoning and logic were held in high regard, rejected the idea of a curse outright. They believed the key to the mystery lay in understanding the biology behind the girls' strange traits. Perhaps the girl's appearance was the result of some inherited genetic mutation, they speculated. Some thought that the girls could be the product of incest or other hidden, irregular unions, explaining both the strange physical features and the absence of any identifiable fathers. The lack of a paternal figure could be attributed to the social stigma surrounding these relationships, a town so steeped in its own past that it would prefer to ignore the existence of children born from shameful unions. Despite these attempts at rational explanation, no one was able to definitively answer why these girls kept appearing. The discoveries became more frequent, and with each one, the sense of unease grew. The strange appearance of the girls was not the only thing that unsettled the townspeople. It was their eerie detachment, their otherworldly presence that made the mystery so terrifying. Each girl, after being found, was taken in by local families, but it was said that they never truly seemed to belong anywhere. They had an air of melancholy about them, a distance in their eyes that set them apart from other children. They would often be quiet, withdrawn, and when they did speak, it was in a tone that some described as strange, not quite fitting with the rest of the community's way of life. It was as if these girls existed in a different realm altogether, connected to something ancient and unfathomable that no one could fully understand. It wasn't just the people in Fairhope who were becoming disturbed by the increasing number of girls being found. Word began to spread to nearby towns and even farther afield, and soon the regions surrounding communities were taking notice. Researchers, journalists, and even paranormal investigators arrived in Fairhope, all eager to find answers, but they left with no more information than when they arrived. The mystery only deepened as outsiders delved into the town's history. Some of them, like the religious leaders, remained steadfast in their belief that these girls were divine punishment, a sign that the sins of the past could never be erased, no matter how much time passed. Others were more skeptical, attributing the phenomenon to some sort of genetic defect or social phenomenon that could eventually be explained by science. The more they dug, the more the town's dark history came to light. But with each discovery, the core of the mystery, who these girls were, and why they kept appearing, remained out of reach. Meanwhile, the Lark family, once a prominent presence in the town, continued to maintain their silence. Their ancestral estate, now a crumbling ruin, stood as a symbol of their lost power and wealth. The family had long retreated from public life, choosing to live in seclusion, avoiding both the whispers of the townspeople and the scrutiny of outsiders. The estate had fallen into disrepair, its grounds overrun with weeds and its mansion a decaying shadow of its former grandeur. The Larks were no longer the powerful landowners they had once been, but their legacy remained a dominant force in the town's collective memory. The fear that their bloodline might be connected to the girls only fueled the townspeople's growing obsession with the Larks' past. Could the family's shameful history be the key to understanding the girls' mysterious origins? In the midst of all the growing fear and confusion, the girls themselves became the focal point of the town's unease. Each time a new girl appeared, the same pattern would unfold. She would be found abandoned, usually on the outskirts of town or near the old Lark estate. She would be taken in by a local family, placed in their care, but she would never truly integrate into their lives. The girls were often described as distant, haunted even, as if they carried some unspoken burden that made them stand apart. Some residents even began to speak of the girls in hushed tones, calling them ghosts or souls in waiting, suggesting that they were somehow caught between the living and the dead, wandering in a liminal space that could not be easily explained. The absence of their fathers was the central puzzle, a detail that seemed to refuse any logical explanation. The girls were found in places where no one could have left them, and when the authorities searched for their origins, no trace of their fathers could be found. In some cases, the girls would later speak of vague memories, fleeting glimpses of figures they couldn't quite recall, but no one ever came forward to claim them. The mystery of the missing fathers only deepened the sense of unreality surrounding the entire situation. Were these girls abandoned intentionally? Or was there something more insidious at work? The more the town speculated, the more answers slipped away, as if the truth was always just out of reach. The growing number of girls, always with the same striking red hair, always with the same pale skin, became an inescapable reminder of the past that Fairhope could not escape. The town's dark history, its legacy of slavery, and its connection to the Larks hung heavily over the mystery. But no one could explain how the girls fit into that history, or whether they were simply the latest incarnation of an ancient curse, or the product of some long-hidden family secret. In the midst of this turmoil, the psychological toll on the town's residents began to take shape. Fear began to cloud their judgment, and old prejudices, those tied to the town's history of slavery and power, resurfaced in more subtle ways. The girls, though often treated with sympathy, became symbols of the town's unresolved guilt. They were a reminder that the past was never truly gone, that the sins of those who had come before would never be fully buried, no matter how much the town tried to move on. For some, the mystery became an obsession, a puzzle that could not be solved. For others, it became a source of fear, a reminder that some things are better left unexplored. And for the girls themselves, trapped in a cycle of abandonment and mystery, there was no escape. They were part of a story that had yet to be written, a history that could not be erased. And as long as the girls continued to appear, the people of Fairhope would remain haunted by the questions that refused to be answered. The town, like the girls themselves, was caught in a web of uncertainty and darkness that would remain for years to come. As the years went by and the mystery of the red-haired, pale-skinned girls continued to unfold, the theories surrounding their existence began to shift from simple speculations to darker, more elaborate explanations. The town of Fairhope had been engulfed by a sense of anxiety, its people divided between those who clung to superstition and those who sought rational explanations. Yet, the more the mystery deepened, the more the boundaries between belief and reason began to blur. For some, the presence of the girls had become an obsession, a riddle that demanded an answer. And so, the search for an explanation took on new urgency, driving both locals and outsiders to dig deeper into the past, attempting to connect the dots between the girls' strange features, their absence of fathers, and the shadowy history of the Lark family. The arrival of a local historian, someone with a reputation for uncovering buried truths, added fuel to the fire. The historian, a woman named Margaret Mayfield, had spent years studying the history of Fairhope and its surrounding regions, focusing especially on the Lark family. Unlike the religious figures who saw the girls as a divine test or the skeptics who dismissed them as mere genetic anomalies, Margaret approached the mystery with the mindset of a detective, determined to unearth the truth, no matter how dark it might be. Armed with old records, letters, and land deeds, she began to piece together a story that had long been obscured by time and silence. What Margaret uncovered was unsettling. The Lark family, once the wealthiest in the region, had not only built their fortune on the backs of enslaved people but had been involved in a series of strange, unexplainable events. These were not the kinds of things you would find in the official town history books, nor were they the subject of polite conversation in the homes of Fairhope's elite. But the further Margaret dug, the more she found evidence of bizarre, secretive practices linked to the Lark estate. There were whispered references to occult rituals, to children born under unusual circumstances, and to the Larks' obsession with bloodlines, particularly the preservation of their bloodline, which they believed to be superior and worth protecting at all costs. Margaret's findings pointed to something much more disturbing than a mere curse. The Larks, it seemed, had long been fixated on creating a perfect, untainted lineage, one that could be passed down through generations without interruption. It was a belief rooted in the family's elitism, their sense of entitlement, and their deep-seated fear of losing their status. This obsession with purity extended beyond simple genetics. The Larks had been known to engage in practices that many considered taboo. They kept meticulous records of their family's bloodlines, carefully monitored potential partners, and went to great lengths to control the unions that were formed within their social circle. It was even said that certain Lark family members had participated in occult ceremonies meant to strengthen the family's bloodline, to ensure that it remained untainted by the outside world. Margaret's research revealed that the Larks were not just powerful landowners but also secretive, insular figures whose actions had been obscured by their wealth and influence. The family's wealth, it turned out, was not just built on the backs of enslaved people, but on a series of moral compromises, sacrifices made to maintain their position at the top of the social hierarchy. These compromises, however, had consequences that the Larks had never fully anticipated. The dark rituals they had participated in, the strange practices they had indulged in to secure their legacy, had unleashed something beyond their control. It was as though they had tampered with forces they didn't fully understand, and now those forces were taking shape in the form of the girls with red hair and pale skin. As Margaret's investigation deepened, she found connections to the girls that were chilling. She discovered that the pattern of the girls' appearances corresponded with certain key events in the Lark family's history. The girls seemed to appear in cycles, with each new generation of girls corresponding to a significant period of time after some traumatic event or loss had occurred within the Lark family. It was as though these events had triggered the appearance of the girls, drawing them into the fold of the family's twisted legacy. But what was their true role in all of this? Were they a punishment, a curse, or something even darker? The more Margaret uncovered, the more she began to theorize that the girls were not merely the result of a family's obsession with purity but were, in fact, the physical manifestations of the family's darkest deeds. These girls, with their striking appearance and mysterious origins, might be the product of some kind of ritual, a twisted attempt to create a bloodline that was beyond human. They were not born from ordinary unions but were the result of something more unnatural, something that had been cultivated over generations. Margaret's theory was not one that could be easily accepted by the townspeople. The idea that the girls were the product of some dark, occult practice was not something that the town's leaders, religious figures, or even most of the residents were willing to entertain. Yet, Margaret's research seemed to point in this direction with alarming clarity. There were records, letters, and journal entries that hinted at secretive meetings, occult gatherings, and ceremonies designed to ensure the continuation of the Lark family's bloodline. In these records, Margaret found references to children born in strange, unexplained circumstances, children who shared certain physical traits, much like the girls who were now appearing in Fairhope. Despite the mounting evidence, the town continued to reject Margaret's findings. There were those who still clung to the belief that the girls were the result of some tragic accident or genetic disorder, and the idea of a dark family history seemed too far-fetched for many to accept. The religious community, in particular, continued to view the girls through the lens of divine punishment, insisting that they were part of some greater moral test. But as more and more girls continued to appear, it became increasingly difficult to dismiss the idea that there was something more at play. In the years following Margaret's investigation, the town of Fairhope became consumed with the mystery of the girls. New theories were proposed, each more outlandish than the last, and the lines between fact and fiction began to blur. Some townspeople claimed to have seen the girls wandering the woods near the Lark estate, speaking to figures that no one else could see. Others whispered that the girls had been seen entering the ruins of the Lark mansion, as if drawn to its decaying walls by some unseen force. The idea that the girls were somehow connected to the Lark estate, to the land itself, became more prevalent with each new discovery. The mystery of the girls remained unresolved, but their presence had changed Fairhope forever. The town, once a quiet, idyllic community, was now a place haunted by its past. The people of Fairhope could not escape the legacy of the Lark family, nor could they escape the haunting question of who the girls truly were. Were they the result of a cursed bloodline, the product of long-forgotten rituals, or were they simply the victims of a town too eager to bury its dark secrets? Whatever the truth, the answers remained elusive, and the mystery of the girls would continue to torment Fairhope for generations to come. As the town moved on, carrying its questions into the future, the girls remained at the heart of its haunted legacy. No matter how much time passed, the unanswered questions would linger in the minds of those who lived through it. And for the girls, whose origins could never truly be explained, there would always be the uncertainty of their place in history, as the children of a forgotten past, born into a world that could not and would not accept them. As the mystery surrounding the red-haired, pale-skinned girls continued to unfurl, the town of Fairhope entered a state of profound isolation. With each passing year, the disappearance of the girls seemed more inevitable, as if their appearances were tied to some unexplainable cycle that the town could neither disrupt nor understand. The weight of the unknown began to take a toll on both the community's sense of identity and its psyche. The very fabric of Fairhope's social structure was being torn apart by fear, superstition, and an undercurrent of guilt that no one could truly pinpoint. For those who had once been skeptical of the supernatural theories, the overwhelming evidence of the girls' connections to the Lark family history became impossible to ignore. Whether one believed in curses, occult rituals, or simply the tragedy of the Lark family's legacy, one thing became clear: the girls were no accident. They were too consistent in their appearance, their mannerisms, and the absence of their fathers. This haunting repetition of unexplained events became a stark reminder of how deeply the town's history and its dark past were woven into the present. Fairhope's attempt to carry on as though nothing was wrong had begun to fray at the edges, with the unanswerable mystery of the girls eating away at the heart of the community. In this atmosphere of growing paranoia and suspicion, those few who still sought answers from the scientific and logical realm were overwhelmed by the mystery. Doctors, biologists, and even geneticists were called in to study the girls, trying to explain their striking physical characteristics, the pale skin, the bright red hair, the unusual features that seemed to connect them to something ancient and forgotten. Yet, despite the latest advancements in medical science, none of the experts could find a satisfactory explanation for the girls' condition. Genetic testing yielded nothing that could be tied to any known disorders or mutations. It was as though their appearance was not something inherent to human biology but something outside of nature itself. Scientists and medical professionals who were once confident that they could find a reasonable explanation soon found themselves floundering, unable to offer any insight that made sense within the confines of established knowledge. The more they tried to understand, the more they were left with an unsettling feeling that these girls were not simply anomalies of nature, but rather manifestations of something that defied all reason. The girls did not belong to the scientific realm of explanation, they belonged to something else entirely, an unknown, almost mythological sphere that could not be penetrated by conventional wisdom. The town's reliance on rationality only seemed to deepen its confusion, as it became evident that what was happening in Fairhope was not something that could be explained by science alone. As the years passed, the girls became a symbol of the town's collective guilt. The absence of their fathers, the uncertainty surrounding their origins, and the unshakable connection to the Lark family left the town to wrestle with its own dark history. Fairhope had long been a town built on the wealth and power of the Lark family, a family whose fortune had been derived from the exploitation of enslaved people. The sins of the past had never truly been addressed or atoned for, and now it seemed as though the land itself was rejecting the town's attempts to move on, forcing the people to face what had been buried for so long. Many in the town began to question whether the girls were the physical manifestation of this unresolved guilt. Were they the result of a curse, a retribution for the town's complicity in the horrors of slavery, or were they something more? Some speculated that the girls were born from the sins of the past, the remnants of a family whose twisted obsession with purity and bloodlines had somehow spawned these strange children. Others whispered that the girls were the product of some kind of supernatural reckoning, a force that sought to balance the scales for the injustices committed on the land. No matter the theory, there was one common thread that linked them all: the girls were a reminder that the past could not be so easily erased. The most disturbing theory, however, was one that suggested the girls were not just victims of circumstance but were actually complicit in the continuation of the Lark family's legacy. The idea that these girls, with their otherworldly appearance and mysterious origins, might somehow be the next generation of the Lark bloodline, a bloodline that had been tainted by sin and violence, sent chills through the town. If the Larks had truly engaged in occult practices, as some records hinted, then perhaps the girls were the product of these dark rituals. This theory suggested that the girls were not simply innocent bystanders to the Lark family's crimes, but were, in fact, part of the family's twisted design to perpetuate its influence and power. Yet, despite these increasingly sinister theories, the girls themselves remained elusive. As they grew older, many of them showed little interest in the town's affairs. They remained detached, cold, and distant, often retreating into the woods or near the ruins of the Lark estate, as if drawn to the place by some unseen force. Even as the townspeople grew more curious and desperate to understand the girls themselves seemed to resist any attempts at explanation. Some of them would disappear for days or even weeks at a time, only to reappear in the same strange, quiet manner, as though they had been somewhere else entirely, somewhere beyond the reach of the town's understanding. It was as if they were existing in a separate world, disconnected from the lives of those around them, their existence tied to something that the rest of the town could neither understand nor touch. Some of the girls were placed in families, only to be returned after a short time, often with vague and unsettling explanations for their behavior. Others were sent to the local orphanage, where they were kept in isolation from the other children, though none of the staff could explain why. They were treated with a mixture of curiosity and fear, as if the very act of being near them might expose one to whatever it was that marked them as different. The idea that the girls were somehow connected to the Lark estate grew stronger with each new appearance. The old mansion, now a decaying ruin, seemed to exert a gravitational pull on the girls, as if they were drawn to it by some unseen force. Some residents began to speculate that the land itself was cursed, that the ruins of the mansion held some malevolent power that attracted the girls to it. Others believed that the mansion was a kind of gateway, a portal to another realm, where the girls were being summoned from an unknown place, perhaps even from a time long past. But as the mystery deepened, so did the frustration of those who had been trying to solve it. The town's once vibrant sense of community began to deteriorate, replaced by an atmosphere of suspicion and unease. People became more secretive, more guarded. Neighbors who had once been close friends now spoke in hushed tones, as if afraid of being overheard. The once bustling streets of Fairhope were now eerily quiet, as if the entire town had been paralyzed by the uncertainty of the situation. No one dared to speak openly about the girls for fear of attracting attention or inviting suspicion. As the mystery continued to unfold, the fear in Fairhope only intensified. The idea that the girls were linked to the Lark family's past, and perhaps even to its sinister practices, became a specter that haunted the town's every waking moment. Despite the best efforts of some to explain the events through science or religion, the answers remained out of reach. The town could not escape the truth that, no matter how hard they tried, they would never truly understand the girls or the forces that had shaped them. The girls remained an enigma, a symbol of the town's forgotten sins, and the curse of Fairhope itself seemed to be inescapable. With each passing year, as more girls were discovered and the mystery deepened, the town seemed to lose itself more and more. The questions about the girls, about their origins, their connection to the Larks, and their purpose in the town's twisted history, remained unanswered, and the town of Fairhope seemed condemned to exist in a state of perpetual unease, haunted by the ghosts of the past that refused to be laid to rest. The girls, like the town itself, were trapped in a cycle of uncertainty, caught between the living and the dead, between the past and the present, with no clear escape from the haunting legacy they carried with them. As the mystery of the red-haired, pale-skinned girls continued to deepen, Fairhope found itself in the grip of a collective silence. Years had passed since the first girl had been found, and the questions that had once burned so brightly now simmered beneath the surface, unanswered but never forgotten. The discoveries of the girls, with their striking features and the absence of their fathers, were no longer isolated incidents. They had become woven into the very fabric of the town's identity, a strange and unsettling thread that connected the present to a past many wished to ignore. Yet, despite the years of tension, fear, and speculation, the mystery surrounding the girls remained as impenetrable as ever. The town's desperate search for answers had yielded nothing, no concrete explanations, no logical theories, and certainly no closure. Theories abounded, of course, each one more outlandish than the last. Some believed the girls were born of ancient, forgotten rituals, the product of the Lark family's obsession with purity and power. Others whispered that they were the consequence of some long-forgotten family curse, a supernatural retribution for the sins of the Lark's ancestors. But as time wore on, the lines between belief and reason grew increasingly blurred. The town's once thriving community had fractured under the strain of these mysteries, with people divided between those who clung to superstition and those who sought a rational explanation that, in truth, seemed just as elusive. Among those who still sought answers was Margaret Mayfield, the historian who had long been the town's most vocal advocate for uncovering the truth about the girls' origins. In her pursuit of understanding, Margaret had become almost obsessed with the idea that the Lark family's dark past was inextricably tied to the strange occurrences in Fairhope. She had unearthed countless records of the Lark family's sordid history, including references to occult rituals and bizarre practices that suggested a family obsessed not just with wealth and power but with ensuring the continuation of a bloodline they believed to be of divine origin. Margaret's research had led her to the chilling theory that the Larks had, in some sense, created the girls. Whether through deliberate genetic manipulation or some form of ritualistic breeding, she believed the girls were an attempt to create a new generation of Larks, one that would not be bound by the limitations of biology, but one that would carry the family's legacy into the future. Yet, as Margaret pushed forward with her research, she began to encounter resistance not just from the town's religious leaders, who insisted that the girls were the result of divine punishment, but also from the scientific community. The geneticists and biologists who had been brought in to study the girls' unusual appearance found themselves frustrated by the lack of conclusive data. No known genetic disorders could explain the girls' pale skin, their distinctive red hair, or their strange behavior. The tests conducted on the girls revealed nothing abnormal, nothing that would suggest an answer to the riddle that had consumed the town for so long.